Your Partner in Success Radio is a free business podcast with host Denise Griffiths. It's all about great stories, conversation, and context to help you move your business and life forward with actionable tips and advice from her guest experts. To listen and subscribe, just find us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you consume your podcasts.
Good morning and welcome to Your Partner in Success Radio. This is where top performers share their secrets to help you achieve your personal and your professional goals. I am your host, Denise Griffiths, and together with my truly amazing guests, we bring you inspiring and actionable insights to take your life and your business to the next level. Ranked in the top 2% globally, this podcast really is a must listen. And again, it's really because of my guests. So when you are tuning in for whether you're tuning in for entrepreneurial tips, career advice, or personal development strategies, get ready to turn inspiration into action, challenges into triumphs, and dreams into reality. And today I am really excited. I get to welcome to the show Emmy-winning NBC News reporter, broadcasting icon, and prolific author Eric Burns. Now, he is renowned for his journalistic prowess, and he's been featured on NBC Nightly News and The Today Show, earning a place among broadcasting legends like Murrow and Cronkite. And beyond the screen, he is also an accomplished playwright and historian with 15 books to his name. Did I mention, he writes a lot? And today we're talking about, I've got this book in front of me, and I love this book. Today we're talking about spiritualism, which his exploration of spiritualism, which led to the intriguing book When the Dead Talked and the Smartest Minds in the World Listened. It's an interesting title, and he's going to tell you how he got that title. And he meticulously researched this with the support of the Society for Psychological or Physical Research. I'm not sure. Eric will have to tell me. That book is on my desk, and we will explore it today. So good morning, Eric. Welcome to Your Partner in Success Radio. Thank you for sending me your book.
Well, it was a pleasure to send you my book, and the word is psychical. I won't be pedantic throughout the course of the interview, but I'll tell you it's psychical research.
I could not. It's like, I like to think I'm fairly intelligent. That's a new word for me. So thank you. I'm going to go pick that one up.
You're welcome.
Okay, so tell us, Eric, a bit about you. I mean, I think I covered the big points, but is there anything else you want the audience to know before I start peppering you with questions? And I will, trust me.
No, actually, the attraction for me of talking to you is to be peppered by questions about this topic, not to promote myself.
Well, thank you. I want people to understand. And listen, this is a note to the readers. I've got the book open in front of me. And you start out with, I never thought I would write a book like When the Dead Talked and the Smartest Minds in the World Listened. Never thought the topic would engage me for more than a paragraph or two. Let's talk about that, because did this just come out of nowhere, or how did this happen?
It's the first of the 15 books that I've written that I started on without knowing a single thing about the topic, and not having, prior to beginning my research, not having any real interest in making up my own mind about whether it was possible for the living to communicate with the deceased. It just wasn't a part of any of my thought processes. But I was reading another book, and in that book was a brief mention of William James, who I guess we might call the reigning genius of American history. The brother of the novelist Henry James. He was considered the father of empiricism. He was the first man to introduce psychology to the college curriculum, which he did at Harvard. He lived in the latter half of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century, which is when my book is centered. It is a history, not a book about current events. But the appeal to me, and actually, literally, Denise, when I read what I'm going to tell you now, I dropped the book on my lap, which wasn't a great distance, But what I read was that James, the least likely person in the world to believe in an afterlife with which communication was possible, James did believe, started to believe when um, some members of his family went to a seance, and um, the medium told them that she had been talking to, I think it was James's sister or aunt. I don't remember, but that she was going to die. She had been ill. She was going to die in 2 days at 2 o'clock in the morning. She died in 2 days at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I was hooked. I said to myself, if this topic is substantive enough to attract someone like William James as a believer, it is certainly substantive enough for me to investigate. And what intrigued me most was not the notion of proving whether or not this was possible, although I did reach some conclusions, but the juxtaposition which the title reveals. When the dead talk, that makes you think of old women on street corners wearing bath towels on their heads instead of turbans with crystal balls, people of no academic repute. And the smartest minds in the world listen. I wanted to understand why. Why did people like William James, and I'll tell you later on, why did people like William James want to study what seemed to so many people to be fraudulent? I was hooked for that reason.
Well, and that makes sense. And when your publicist, she got in touch with me and said, "Would you be interested in interviewing Eric Burns? And here's the title of his book." And I went, "Huh." And when I got I already said yes. And I told you why in the green room. Devin Blaine is a good friend of mine, and she knows my podcast, and she knows me well. And when she says, "Would you like to interview this person?" I don't even have to go look. It's an instant yes. She knows that. Now, she did not know that this is a topic that I'm fascinated with. And I'll be very frank with you and the audience. I have never believed that our energy just disappears. I mean, we are energy, and it can't just die. It can't just disappear. And I've had a very similar thing happen with me. I was in the bathtub and my sister called me from the hospital. Her husband had a hugely enlarged heart, and we knew he was going to pass. We just didn't know when. And she was very quiet, which was unusual for her. She said, "Is he going to die?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "When?" I said, "Tomorrow." And he did. I didn't even have to think about it.
Denise, as I said, the book is a history, late 19th century, early 20th century. Much more recently, The New Yorker, in an issue in 2021, published the results of a poll that astonished me, summarizing one out of every three Americans claims to have talked to a deceased friend or relative.
And I don't find that shocking at all.
Well, I did. I've not had the experience, but writing the book, I mean, there are some conclusions that I have drawn in the book, but mostly I wanted to know how these brilliant men, and they were men primarily. Queen Victoria was a believer. Marie Curie was a believer. Mostly it was men. I wanted to know why they weren't, as you said was the case with you, shocked to find so many people believing in the possibility of talking with the deceased. And that is really the main focus of the book, the academic credentials of the smartest minds in the world, and what kinds of tests and experiments and trials they put the top tier of psychics or mediums through in order to come to their conclusions.
Well, and you've mentioned this a couple of times. Let's talk about who these people were.
There were two societies formed. In 1852 in London was the Society for Psychical Research. In 1855 in the United States, headed for a while by William James, was the American Society for Psychical Research. The latter included Thomas Alva Edison, Nathaniel Hawthorne. Mostly, Denise, it included people whose names we don't know because they were academics. The dean of the divinity school at Harvard, a man who worked at Johns Hopkins and was regarded as the top research chemist in America at the time. I mean, these people haven't survived the emphasis on the celebrity culture, but fame didn't matter to me. What mattered to me was that these men were legitimately geniuses. Now, parenthetically, I must say that it was always a minority in the academe as in society on the whole of people who accepted this belief. All right, end of parentheses, back to the members in London. The Society for Psychical Research, as I said, Queen Victoria paid attention to their work. Oh, as did Mark Twain in the United States.
I was just going to mention him. I'm on page, well, it's the introduction, and the title is Before He Was Mark Twain, and I was hooked right then, right there.
He saw his brother not only deceased, he wasn't at the time that Twain saw it, but he saw, he says, precisely how his brother was laid out. And the next day, he found out his brother had died in a steamboat accident, and he was laid out exactly as Twain's vision had proclaimed. But just quickly back to the Londoners who took this seriously. Gladstone and Balfour, names unknown today, both went on to be prime ministers of England, and they were members of the Society for Psychical Research. Lewis Dodgson, who under a pseudonym wrote Alice in Wonderland, was a member. Alfred Russel Wallace,
right,
who devised the theory of natural selection, that is to say, what we call Darwin's theory, who devised it before Darwin but didn't release it publicly, was a member. So again, a minority of the smartest minds in the world, but indeed members of the smartest minds in the world.
How did you find them? I mean, how did you, I know you are a brilliant researcher. How far down the rabbit hole did you have to go to find these people?
Not terribly far, because some books have been written about this subject. Most books that are written about the possibility of communicating with the dead are the word schlock is the only word that comes to mind, and are full of tales that simply can't be believed. But there are a couple of reputable books that examine the subject with some objectivity, and these books made it a point to mention, as did some private research done by the American Society for Psychical Research. I did some work at the library there. It's in New York, and to find the names was relatively easy to do. What took a little more time was finding out the extent to which these men immersed themselves in trying to find out whether it was possible to communicate with the afterlife. That was a lot harder to do, and the very impressive library at the American Society for Psychical Research, which is in New York, just off Central Park, the library there was of of big assistance.
I would think it would be, and I can't remember his name right now, although I've read all the Sherlock Holmes mysteries. What was his name? Sir, gosh, it's at the tip of my
Arthur Conan
Arthur
Doyle.
Doyle, right. Isn't he mentioned somewhere? Because he, I believe, was a big believer.
He is mentioned, and I admit somewhat dismissively in my
I
book,
caught that.
because
Yeah, I caught that.
he was he was he was too much of a believer. He could not accept the fact that there were, well, somebody estimated that 95% of the mediums um, in this country around the turn of the last century were frauds. He never accepted any sign of doubt. Whereas the people who I've identified as the smartest minds in the world were much more cautious about what they said, much more exacting about the standards that they applied to determine the legitimacy or lack of it in mediums.
Well, and that's something you should apply to life anyway, no matter what it is that you're looking at or investigating or presenting as yourself. I mean, you need to be careful.
You could, Denise, because of the findings of some of the smartest minds in the world, uh, make of my book a plea, so to speak, for open-mindedness.
Hmm.
That's what the smartest minds in the world wanted to do. They, not all of them, not all of the members of these two societies for psychical research um, believed in communication with the afterlife, either before they began their research or even afterward. A few were dubious. They simply wanted the idea, and this is important, Denise, in understanding these men and accepting their findings. They just thought it was worth research. Their fellow academics scoffed at them. A lot of people, and William James is one of them, had their reputations tarnished. Um, they were written about in very derogatory terms in academic journals. So and so, the president of Cornell, who was a member of the United States, was vilified. You know, why isn't this man running this university instead of dabbling with this folderol? Um, but it 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 it, it of course wasn't folderol to him, and it wasn't folderol to a lot of people who were, as I said, who at least started out wanting not to make the case for um, this kind of communication necessarily, but to take it seriously enough to investigate the possibility as if it were chemistry, as if it were physics.
Right,
They
right.
wanted it to
They're
be part of
curious, very
the
curious.
college curriculum.
Oh, I think I remember seeing that in the book, but I didn't realize I should have written this down that they actually wanted it to be part of a curriculum. I'm
Some
guessing,
did, some
right.
did, yes.
I'm guessing that never really came to be.
No, if at Duke University, in a way, I'm sorry I mentioned it because I'm not going to remember the name of it. But there was a whole school of, I forget what it was called, Psychic Research, ESP, and for years you could get a degree in this at Duke, take many courses, um, and then finally it got to be too controversial, and for a decade or more now, maybe 2 decades, it has not been in the curriculum. But that's the only inroad in this country that these kinds of studies ever made.
Well, the military has something that they work with where people are doing uh, distance watching. I can't remember what it's called, but the military is very much paying attention to things like this.
Yes, and so uh, do a lot of police agencies
Right.
uh, do this. The percentage of times that a psychic uh, You'll notice I think that I'm using these words interchangeably, psychic and medium. Um, the number of times that a medium has found who the killer was or how the killing was done, a vast minority of cases, but it has happened, and it has happened enough so that a lot of police departments use it more than will admit it, by the way. Some refuse to admit because they're afraid they'll be derided. But there are some police officials, including a former chief of police in New York, who wrote about how after they had tried every other way they could to find someone who is referred to in the history books, when he is referred to at all, as the mad bomber of New York.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
I remember.
couldn't find out who it was, finally went to a medium, and the medium not only told the police who he was, described how he would be dressed when they found him. The police were astonished.
I don't know why they would be. Listen, as humans, our minds are only as open as we allow them to be. And sometimes you don't want to open it so much that your brain falls out. That's me being snarky. But you see that a lot these days. But I have all of my life believed that we're not alone here. I mean, how arrogant is that to think that we're the only sentient beings around? It's ridiculous. And I think there's a lot that goes on around us, above us, behind us, that we don't know to look at, if that makes any sense at all.
Or listen to.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something about Thomas Edison. To some people about whom or with whom I've discussed the subject, Edison's belief was the most surprising of all. The last invention that Edison worked on was something called the spirit finder. Spirit finder. He believed that in a not in a literal sense, but in some psychical sense, voices never died. That the voices of the past gathered together in little groups that he called swarms, as if they were bees, still exist in the air, in the atmosphere around us. This is Thomas Edison's belief. And so he was going to and he started on a machine called a spirit finder. Unfortunately, neither he nor his top assistant who worked with him on it left any notes, any drawings, any guidance, because they had just gotten started when Edison passed away. But to give you a specific example of what he thought, Edison believed that if we could only find the right pathway, it would be possible to listen to the Sermon on the Mount as Jesus preached it.
Oh.
And if Edison had lived, he would have worked on that project exclusively.
How was this project determined to exist? Was it a piece of equipment? How did
He left.
anybody know what it was?
Nobody knows what it was because Edison didn't say. Edison wrote an article for Scientific American in which he described his core beliefs that would make it possible to hear Jesus preach the Sermon on the Mount. He described his notion of the swarm. He said this is what the spirit finder would do, but he gave no, perhaps all inventors fear that if they get specific about their inventions, they'll be stolen from. I don't know. But he wrote about the principles, as did his top assistant write about the principles involved. But there is no clue whatsoever anywhere in any of the Edison archives about how he planned to do it.
That's a shame. While you're talking, I'm thinking of Napoleon Hill, Dr. Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. And he really was what you could call the father of the mastermind because he created a group of people who are long dead, and he called them his mastermind, and he spoke with them on a regular basis.
I thought that I was coming on your program to inform you, and here you are informing me. Uh, I'm embarrassed to say that I have, in all the research I did, and I did quite a bit, not come across Napoleon Hill, but he sounds like a person whose methods, at least, whose goals were
Oh,
fascinating.
they were, and one of my very dear friends, Bengay the Third, was the last mentee of Dr. Napoleon Hill. It's said, and I don't believe this to actually be true, but it is said that Think and Grow Rich sold more copies than the Bible. It's a very famous book, and a lot of people, I mean, I read it all the time. A lot of people are still reading it, and this was about 100 years ago, I think, that he wrote this book. I'll send you some information on it, but he
Okay.
did talk to, and I'm not sure that Edison wasn't one of them. I don't have the list, but I'll look it up and send you that because I think you'll find it fascinating.
I'm sure I will. I'm sure I will. It's something that I hope readers will find fascinating if they decide to read the book is the lengths that the smartest minds in the world went to in order to make sure that, well, there were the three most reputable um, mediums of the time were tested extensively by both societies, the society in the United States and the society in London. And the lengths that the testers, that is to say, the academics, the scientists, researchers who were conducting the test, uh, went to, the lengths to which they went to make sure that there was no fraud being perpetrated were extraordinary. For instance, I'll give you one example. Most psychics work in conducted their seances or their consultations in the dark rooms, no lights. And one of the
No
things,
no tablecloths, no thumping. I get it.
right, but one of the things that a lot of psychics claim to be able to do was to perform telekinesis, which is moving objects simply by the mind, thinking the lamp closer to you. And the trick, usually, and an easy one to discern, was to pull it toward you with black thread, on a black tablecloth in a room with no lights. You wouldn't see the thread. Well, this is just one of many examples of the kinds of things that the geniuses made sure didn't happen. The testing that they did was done with lights on. Um, there were people looking under the tables. There were people standing around the psychic. There was no one, there were no blue teeth. Is that the plural of Bluetooths? I don't know.
I don't
At the time, but there was just no way, in at least three cases, no way that anyone could find fraud being perpetrated. Now, that's not to say that most mediums were like this. Oh, somebody late in the 19th century said, oh, 95% of these people are frauds. Maybe, maybe it's that high. But my reaction was, wait a minute, 5% are not frauds? That's the fascinating thing to me. That was the fascinating thing to me. And there were, I don't know how many finally, but the conclusions of the members of the two societies for psychical research came to indicated that there were some people who simply could do things, could communicate with the afterlife in a way that could not be rationally explained. Now, it's one thing for me to say that, one thing for you to say that, but the book is about people who say that with a great deal of experience in trial and error.
And I'm like, for our audience, we've been talking about Edison and, his tool that did, I'm going to call it a tool, the Spirit Finder that did not get created. That
Mhm.
information is on page 213. So write that down. And when you get the book, you'll be able to find it. So, Eric, this really is a fascinating conversation. And I've read this book twice. I read it on my iPad because I downloaded it in Kindle. And I've got the book itself in front of me. And this poor book, it's got stickies all over it. It's got index cards. It got fat once it hit my desk. It really is. But I
That's
want,
a real compliment for the author. So I give you low grades on neatness and high grades on attentiveness.
well, I didn't mark it up. I don't like to write on books. So I use, stickies. I don't know. Maybe it's from when I was a kid and we weren't allowed to. If we banged up a library book, we got in trouble. And I think that still sticks with me. But let's talk about chapter 9, the census of hallucinations.
Wow. um, I don't think, and I admit this at the beginning of the chapter, um, well, I know it isn't easy to understand. It won't be easy to explain, but let me tell you in broad strokes what it was. The Society for Psychical Research in London undertook a census of hallucinations, and they asked people to um, uh, write in and tell them uh, about incidents that had happened in their lives, which non-believers would consider hallucinatory. Then they did some math that is beyond me, but what was it about? I think 17,000 people in England wrote in, and
Wow.
it was a lot. Most of them were dismissed. They were uh, there was something that seemed irrational about their claims, or something that seemed false about their claims. Eventually, they pared these 17,000 uh, people who had undergone uh, psychic experiences down to 1,000 or less, and these 1,000 or slightly fewer than that, um, who could not be eliminated, were therefore interviewed, and oh gosh, it was hard for me to explain in the book, although I think it's relatively clear. But it's much harder now that the book is not in front of me, and it's been a while since I've written it, to explain how this came about. But in one sentence, uh, the census of hallucinations proved that hallucinations can be real.
Is that why we hear, look, I don't watch the news. I think it's propaganda. And I'll tell anybody, I think it's just nothing but propaganda. But will often, if somebody doesn't understand, say, oh, that's just mass hallucination. I don't know. There's a lot of dead people on the ground. You're calling that a hallucination?
Well, it's a dismissive term,
Yes,
and
it is.
it's a term that was used a lot by critics of the smartest minds in the world, and it's the kind of thing. Um, it's too general a criticism to be meaningful. Oh well, that's he just had a hallucination. What does that mean? It gives you no information. I was surprised, uh, Denise, very surprised, I by the weakness of the arguments of the people who um, were opposed to accepting the idea of communication with the deceased. I would have thought there would be many substantive arguments that could be made against it. But I looked and I looked and I looked, and the arguments were, oh, it was just a hallucination, to, let me give you this example, and I do it with some hesitation because it sounds so preposterous, but there are many witnesses, including members of the House of Commons, members of the House of Lords, And more than one occasion, there were reputable witnesses of a man who levitated himself, sailed, for want of a better term, out a window of his house and sailed back into a window in an adjoining room. I hate to tell that story because it sounds so preposterous. The reason I'm telling you is you would think that that would be something easy to gainsay, something easy to criticize. The most substantive criticism was that, and this didn't account for him sailing out of the room, but that there was a hot air balloon attached to this fellow's apartment building, that he stepped out the window, got into the hot air balloon, rode in it 10 feet, 12 feet, 14 feet, whatever it was, to the next window and got out. Now, I don't know which is more preposterous, the notion that the medium floated that distance, or that he got in a hot air balloon
The
and that
hot air
nobody,
balloon. I'm going to vote for that one. That is preposterous.
nobody, and nobody on the street saw it.
Exactly.
Nobody in the room heard it, heard the wind banging it against the building. Hot air balloons are notoriously difficult to steer.
They're
But
huge.
you see, when I came across criticisms like that, I thought it was really difficult for me. How do you rationalize somebody floating through the air? And the criticism or the explanation is that a hot air balloon did it, and nobody noticed on the street that there was a hot air balloon taking up most of the wall, one of the walls of this building. Um, it was not an easy book to write and make sure that I was as objective as I could be.
I can see why. And, people do want to suspend disbelief. They do. It's just how we're kind of wired. But at some point, you need to say, okay, this could possibly be true. Let me research, let me look at it. Don't let me just, dismiss it out of hand. If you're intensely curious, you're going to be looking at a lot of different things that may not make any sense to you, but you're still going to go do the looking, the researching. And if you're still doubting it, well, shelve it and go back to it another time, or leave it alone and find something else to be
Mhm.
intensely curious about. But sometimes, and the more lurid the story is, the more I'm inclined to go, didn't happen. Nope. I don't know about you, but if it gets so nonsensical, I've got nowhere to go from there.
Well, uh, Denise, maybe you'll have better luck than I remembering the numbers, but they're in my book, and you've seen them before, I'm sure. Estimates of what percentage of the brain human beings actually use.
I think
Now,
it's
I have
somewhere around 2%, isn't it?
uh,
It's
the
low.
highest that I came across was 1%.
Ooh.
Which I mentioned in the book. I'm sure there are people who think it's 2%, and also in the book, in the next sentence, I think, and I don't know what this number is called, but the percentage, the estimate was the percentage of the brain that we use, a decimal point, and I think there were 7 or 8 zeros after the decimal point. One trillionth. I don't know. The point is that we use so little of our brain power that we limit ourselves, we prohibit ourselves perhaps from understanding much of what happens in the world
No
because we're
question.
just not attuned to it yet.
Well, we're not, and we're so busy running around, especially these days when we're distracted constantly. I mean, our brains are just overloaded just with the distractions. Cell phone rings, you got email, your cat just threw up in your shoe. There's so many different things going on, and it's easy to exhaust yourself, and you don't have room in your brain to say, what was that I just saw out of the corner of my eye? Could have been a floater. Maybe have floaters in your eyes. Could have been something else. But we don't really dig into it.
Well, it's not our job. We have jobs, we have children, and we have almost, I'll use the word inherent, Denise, almost inherent beliefs about this subject without knowing anything about it. Most people don't know anything about how mediums claim to work, what their process is, what their success or failure rate is. But just being told by someone, hey, I was talking with my great grandfather the other day. He's been dead for 40 years. Well, immediately you come to a conclusion. So it's a topic, I think, which is so um, controversial.
Frightening to a lot of people. When you come across something that you cannot understand, your first instinct is to just wince away from it.
Yeah. Well, or wince toward an opinion that's based on nothing but what it sounds like to you.
Right.
You did not talk to your great grandfather yesterday who died 40 years ago. Nonsense. Let's watch the Jets game. Well, people wouldn't watch a Jets game, but that's that's for another guest on another one of your programs. But it is the kind of topic that lends itself to belief or disbelief without investigation, I think.
I agree with you. And by the way, again, for our audience, The Incredible Flying Medium, that is chapter 8. You've got, I've got this book, I'm telling you. Let me find this again. I want to figure out how to, to spiritualists. You were talking about the Fox sisters. That's a whole nother story, and we won't go into it right now. But in Rochester, the burned over district's megalopolis billboard was erected at roadside in the matter of a gravestone. It says modern spiritualism, born March 31st, 1848, died at Rochester, November 15th, 1888. Aged 40 years, 7 months, and 15 days, born of mischief and gone to mischief. What the heck was that all about?
The Fox sisters are considered the founders, and one of them wasn't even a teenager when they founded modern spiritualism, which is a term that's used for communication with the dead. But after 4 or 5 years of, well, I guess according to the obit, it was 5 years. One of the Fox sisters at a large New York venue. I don't think it was Carnegie Hall, but it was a large, prestigious New York venue. Got up on stage and caused the biggest furor that spiritualism has ever had when she said, "It's a fraud. I've been lying to you people for 5 years, and I'm not going to do it anymore." Hence the billboard that you just mentioned. Spiritualism survived that. And a few years later, the Fox sisters recanted and said, well, yes, actually, there is such a thing as spiritualism. But it did have a formal obituary or tombstone.
And see, that's a lengthy chapter, and I read it twice because I'm still, I can't determine if I think these girls were just complete and total frauds. I don't know. Maybe there was something real behind it, or maybe they were just charlatans. I can't tell.
They knew things about people in their audiences. And sometimes they audiences is really the appropriate word. It wasn't just a small gathering around a table, a seance, but they performed in some auditoriums. They wouldn't like that word, but
Right.
They knew things that they had no way of knowing unless there was some extrasensory way of knowing it. For instance, they wouldn't know. They were doing their communication with the deceased at a large venue in Rochester, New York. They had no way of knowing who was going to be in the audience. Um, they didn't plant shills because that was tested afterwards, but they knew things. So the confession that was later made didn't really make sense, because the counter argument was, well, how did you know in Rochester that so and so did this, even though she had died so many years before? In Rochester, by the way, um, this was the first time that um, scientists and medical people got involved in testing the legitimacy of this. They after a performance which had astonished the audience, three doctors examined, and I mean physically examined. Let's use today's term: strip searched
Ow.
the two Fox sisters to see, I don't know what, if they had notes written on their body, tattooed on their bodies. Um, at future mass seances, these people stayed backstage the whole time to see if anybody was communicating information, and they were stumped. There was nobody whispering, so to speak, into the Fox sisters' ears. And they got some things wrong, but they got a lot right that there's no way to explain their knowledge of.
I think what I'm thinking of, which is why I'm still puzzled by them, is the apples. Y'all need to read the book. I'm not going to explain it, but there were apples involved when they
Yeah,
were there.
it's good, because I admit in the book that I don't quite understand how the apples led to spiritualism, how what started out as a prank
That's my
became,
problem. That's where I
yeah,
got stuck.
yeah, and none of the research that I did uh, addressed this issue, and I think that's frankly shoddy research on the part of other people. But let me make a comment about the word spiritualism. Spiritualism, um, with a capital S, became considered a religion. And around the turn of the 19th century, well, the early years of the 20th century, it was the seventh most popular religion in the United States. It had more adherents than Mormonism, more than Christian Science. And a lot of it was cultural. I'll do this briefly, but to me, it's a very important um, chapter in the book, the culture of America and how it influences beliefs. Spiritualism grew in this country to its heyday, came into its heyday because of Darwin's book, because of the Civil War, which was the greatest slaughter in our history, and people questioned traditional religion and said, if there is, how could there be a benevolent God who allows our fathers, our sons, our brothers, uh, our neighbors to die so horribly?
It's a question
Um,
that's asked every day all over the world.
yes, and not to be dismissed because it's asked so often, and not to be dismissed with the answer, well, God knows what he's doing. Um, that has just, I have never found that satisfying. It
No,
is
I
not
just,
ours to question why.
right. My teeth snapped when I heard you say that because when I hear it, I just think, oh man, I want to smack somebody on the head.
We'll find out someday.
I know.
When the what's the word I'm looking for? Not revelation, but when the second coming comes, we'll find out.
Or
Well, that's another way of saying we don't
don't
know.
know.
Wait, maybe we'll figure it out.
We don't have a clue.
Mary Todd Lincoln
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
uh, was probably the best, strange way to put it, probably the most effective publicist for spiritualism during this time, because one of her sons died during the Civil
Mhm.
War, not because of the Civil War, but at that time, and she just devoted her life to the study of psychic phenomena, to try to talk to him, to find out what had happened to him. He had a disease, and I don't remember what it was now. But these two factors, and there are others I'm not going to go into now, but the Darwin's On the Origin of Species and the carnage of the Civil War were two of the book mentions, I think, 5 or 6 important factors that culturally weakened the influence in the United States of organized religion, and sent people looking for alternative sets of belief, some of them turning to spiritualism.
And that does make sense. In talking about Mary Todd Lincoln, wasn't she, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't she a big proponent of seances?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, she was.
She honestly, if you read about her, she comes across as bat guano crazy, but I don't think she was. I hope she wasn't.
How did you describe crazy?
Bat guano.
That's what I thought you'd say. What a great description.
I don't know that say what I'm really thinking on the radio.
I don't know that it makes sense, but it's awfully funny. It's awfully funny.
Yeah, and I love to read history. I will read, honestly, I started reading when I was 3 years old. My mother said it was because nobody told me I couldn't. I just picked up books and read them. And honestly, it just never occurred to me that I probably shouldn't be reading Guy de Maupassant at 11, or, some of the things that I read. But I have read about spiritualism. I have read about the concept of reality, which, you talk about. I'll read the back of a cereal box, seriously. And I don't eat cereal. I don't like it. But if that's all that's in front of me, I'll read it and I'll know everything about that garbage that they put in that box. So it's just, we need to read, we need to think, we need to, use our critical thinking skills. But sometimes I think we have to just wander off into the fantastical and see what's out there.
Well, again, this poll published just 2 years ago in the New Yorker, 1 out of every 3 of us agrees with you and has the experience to back it up.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I've never spoken with the dead that I'm aware of.
No, nor have I.
Yeah, and I'm not entirely sure I want to. They had plenty to say while they were still here. I heard it, I listened. But I genuinely do believe that we're not alone here, that, there's a lot of energy swirling around. It may be another dimension. It could be that they're tapping us on the shoulder. I don't know. I just don't think we're alone.
Well, you just haven't figured out how to use that 99% of your brain yet.
Yeah, I'm working on that. If I can get it up to 2%, woohoo!
Who knows what you might learn in just that 1%?
You never know, but you have to be curious. So we've got about 5 more minutes, Eric. What else do you want to share from this book?
I have been asked by people to summarize it, and I don't like to do that. As I just indicated, there are cultural reasons for the popularity of spiritualism. There are a lot of there's a lot in the book, even if you don't read it twice. But
I'll read it again. I'm not done.
Oh, goodness. Well, you'll probably discover things that I don't know, and you should give me a call so that for a next edition I can attribute additional material to you.
Expect emails from me. You'll be getting them.
Okay, I'll be glad to have them. Sir William Crookes won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1907. He was no intellectual slouch. He was a member of the Society for Psychical Research, and he conducted some tests, a couple of days worth of tests with the incredible flying medium, not just to see if he could do that, but could he speak to the dead? Could he as was said, put his hand in a fire and not be burned. Um, the man made a lot of outrageous claims, and Sir William, a Nobel Prize winner, and some of his associates conducted a couple of days worth of meticulously secure tests. And when he was done, he came out and talked to some of his fellow scientists. Some of them were believers, some of them weren't believers. And Crookes told these gentlemen of his findings. And one man said, Sir William, really, you can't believe that. And Sir William's reply was, I didn't say I believed it. I just said it was true.
Now, oh, okay, now I have to think about that. I didn't say I believed it. I just said it was true. That's an interesting sentence.
You could mull over that for quite a while.
I'm never going to understand it. I get that. I've already got that in my head, but you can see something and know that you saw it, but still not believe that you saw it, I guess.
Well, if you want to be cynical,
Oh, yeah, kind of.
you can dismiss that as a non-answer.
Oh,
You know,
either
if
that or it's very profound and we're just not smart enough to figure it out.
it's one or the other. Yes, it's one or the other because in this sense, the sense in which we're discussing Crookes' sentence, true and belief are synonymous terms. You don't believe things that aren't true, that you don't believe also are true. If you believe in it, then you believe it's true.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, he's avoiding the question, but also he could be expressing his bewilderment, and he could also, as you suggest, be expressing something very profound that's in that 99% of unused cranial space.
My first thought is he saw it, he proved it, but he can't really believe that it's true because how could it possibly be true?
And scientists consider the scientific mind, what the
Right.
foundations of the scientific mind are: rationality, common sense, trial and error, experimentation. Um, you have to, no matter what these people are saying, you have to give them some credence. These were the smartest minds of the time.
Right. This is an amazing book. For anybody who's listening to this today or tomorrow or next year, this is an amazing book. So, Eric, I have to ask you, we're going to move away from the book for now because we're just about out of time, which makes me very sad. But with your extensive background in journalism and television, and now as a historian, what's next for you?
Fiction.
What are you writing? And are you going to send me a book?
I'm going to send you a book and not tell you anything about it now.
Ah, oh, that's just cheating.
Well, no, I can't. First of all, I can't. I'm still working on it. Actually, I'm finished with a few drafts, and I will do a few more drafts. But I really don't like to summarize, and it's harder to do with fiction anyhow because
Mm,
all the characters are made up, and you have no reference points. Um, I'm sorry to disappoint you, to lead you on.
I'm heartbroken. I'm distraught.
You're going to get over it. You're going to get over it. And you
I,
asked me the question.
I did. Well, listen, given your successful television career, do you ever find yourself missing that aspect of your professional life, or are you just ready to, keep on writing?
Oh no, I wrote during much of my television career when I had time. My first, I don't know, at least 3 or 4 books were published when I was working full time in television. Do I miss it? I sometimes can't believe, but it's true, how much I don't miss it. I am asked occasionally to do um, guest appearances on programs to talk about the media, but I tell the people who call me that I don't pay that much attention anymore. You know, my mind is directed in other places. The news is hard to listen to for a variety of reasons, and it's not just how horrifying so many events are. It's also the superficiality
Yeah, I
of news
refuse.
presentation.
I won't
I
have it on
used
my television.
when when Tom Brokaw and Jane Pauley hosted the Today Show, I did a weekly segment on the show, and it was the Today Show was a news program back then. Have you seen it in the last few years?
Oh no,
It's
I cut
it
cable when it was
belongs in a
13 years
sideshow.
ago. Oh, I believe you. I never did like I don't watch TV anyway. Like I said, you give me a stack of books, I'm all happy. But I cut cable 13 years ago and I have never missed a moment of it. It actually, the news would make my stomach hurt. And when I realized that it was, assaulting me physically, I cut it out. It's not to say I don't
And
understand what's going on. I do, but I don't get it from mainstream media.
I was going to say you're probably quite well informed by your own methods anyhow.
I am. I make sure that I know what's going on. I'm just not going to have pablum served into my living room every day.
Well, the horror of such stories as Gaza and the superficiality of newscasts and their 2-minute presentations and their chatter back and forth. It just makes most news unwatchable.
I agree with you. Eric, I know this has been an amazing conversation, and I thank you so much. So before I let you go, reluctantly, do you have any kind of final thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience?
Actually, I had, well, I'm going to let Sir William Crooks's statement stand for that, but there is a final thought that I would like to share with you, which is that um, although I find it congenial of you to thank me for being on your program, I would like to thank you for allowing me to be on your program. I didn't do you a favor by spending the last hour with you. Let's say we engaged each other and call it even.
Thank you. I think it's been a really amazing conversation, and I'm so curious. My brain is on fire, and I thank you for that.
You're welcome, and I'm glad I contributed to that effect.
You absolutely did. Well, listen, I sincerely appreciate your company today, and spending time with you, and your book has been a distinct pleasure. And I know that you don't have a genuine online presence. So is there any preferred means of contact for those who wish to learn more about you? And I know, and I can tell this to the audience, you can find Eric and all of his books on Amazon. So go there and go shopping. But Eric, is there any place that you want people to reach you or?
Well, to the chagrin of everybody I work with, I do not have a social media uh, presence. And maybe I will soon because I'm getting tired of being yelled at by respected professional people about not having a social media presence. Right now, I don't. Anybody who is really compelled to communicate with me, you can always communicate with an author by sending a letter to him, care of the publisher.
Oh, okay. So how would they do that?
It's in every book. The publication house is mentioned, the address. You just send it to the, you know, such and such publisher, or Eric Burns, care of such and such publisher, and
Okay.
give the address that's at the front of the book.
Yeah, I'm looking for that right now. Well, I'm not going to give it. You have to go buy the book to get it. How about that? So,
Very good marketing sense. I appreciate it.
I'm not giving it away. Well, listen, everybody. Eric, again, thank you so much. And I genuinely do not want to lose touch with you. So for the audience, as we conclude today's episode, your feedback means a lot to me. And if you found the show helpful, please support us with a quick review on iTunes. Your input is vital in my mission to inspire and empower many more individuals. So don't forget to hit subscribe, leave a review, and share your Partner in Success Radio with friends and colleagues. And be sure to find Eric Burns on Amazon and wander through his book titles. My cat says goodbye. That's Hamilton is an ass, if anybody wants to know. So thank you for tuning in. And Eric, again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
It has been mine as well, Denise.
Thank you.
Get your voice heard. If you would like to launch your own far-reaching podcast, contact Denise Griffiths at yourofficeontheweb.com and go to the podcast tab.